It's a beautiful morning out here on the ranch. The horses are ready, and so are we.
Ever wondered how a single cup of coffee could change a man's life? Out here, a neighbor is a mile past the horizon. The wind knows your name, and kindness isn't charity, it's survival. But one frosted morning, an old rancher poured coffee for the wrong stranger, or perhaps the right one, and that everything. By the next sunrise, 40 riders sat their saddles at his gate, and every last one of them left flowers. Stick around and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because you're going to want to hear more of such mind-boggling stories. Clay Dawson woke to the sound of the wind pushing at the cabin walls. Not the playful summer kind that carried the smell of sage and hay, but the mean, knife-edged winter wind that made even the nails in the wood creak. He swung his legs out of bed and felt the sting of cold floorboards through his socks. Most mornings, he started slow. The cows weren't going anywhere, the fences weren't fixing themselves, and the world out here didn't care if you rushed. But today, he moved with that quiet urgency you get when the weather's about to turn worse in the kitchen. He filled the old enamel kettle from the pump, set it on the stove, and struck a match. The hiss of the flame was almost comforting. Outside the window, the first light of day smeared pale gold on the horizon, though the sun itself wasn't up yet. The frost on the glass looked like tiny mountains, and when he breathed, his own breath clouded the air even inside. Clay took his coffee the same way he took life these days, plain, strong, no fuss. He stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, and leaned against the railing. From here, he could see most of the spread. 50 acres of brittle pasture and cattle huddled against the fence line, their hides rimed with frost. The place wasn't much, but it was his people in town said Clay was one of the good ones, though they said that the way you'd talk about an old pickup, still running, but the paint was long gone. Truth was, ranching hadn't made him rich, and it hadn't made him famous. It had just kept him honest, even if it kept him tired, too. The wind gusted again, rattling the tin roof. That's when he heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps. On frozen dirt at first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks. Then he saw a shadow moving along the road. A man, walking slow, each step leaving a dark print in the frost. He was close enough now that Clay could see the way his coat flapped open at the bottom, too thin for weather like this. His hat was pulled low, and his boots looked beat to death. The kind you kept wearing because you didn't have another pair. Clay's first thought was, trouble. Second thought was, trouble doesn't usually walk in this weather. When the man reached the fence, he stopped, one hand resting on the top rail like it was holding him up. Clay called down from the porch, "You lost?" The stranger looked up slowly. His face was raw from windburn, the skin around his eyes chapped and cracked. And those eyes, pale green, like thawed ice, locked on Clay for a long second before the man spoke. "Just cold," he said. That was it. 2 words, not a complaint, not a story. Just cold. Clay could have sent him on his way. Out here, folks were polite but private, and letting strangers inside your home wasn't how you stayed alive. But there was something about the way the man's fingers curled around that fence, white-knuckled, like letting go might be the last thing he did today. "Get on up here," Clay said finally, jerking his head toward the porch. "Got coffee?" "Ain't much, but it's hot." The stranger climbed the steps slowly, shoulders hunched against the wind. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and bacon grease from yesterday's breakfast. Clay poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. The man took it in both hands like he was afraid it might disappear if he let go. Steam curled around his face. He didn't drink right away, just held it close, breathing in the heat. "Name's Clay," the rancher said. "Eli," the man replied, quiet but certain. They didn't talk for a while. Clay busied himself at the stove, frying up eggs and biscuits, while Eli drank slow, savoring each sip like it was buying him another minute of life. When the food hit the table, Eli ate in that way a man does when pride and hunger are wrestling, trying not to look starved, but losing the fight. Between bites, Clay tried a few questions. Where was he headed? Did he need a lift into town? Eli's answers were short, but not rude. He said he'd been riding with some folks and got separated when the weather turned. His horse had gone lame, so he'd been walking ever since. Something in the way he said, riding with some folks, made Clay think of more than just cowhands, but he didn't press. Out here, you learned not to dig too deep unless you were ready for what you might find. After breakfast, Eli moved to the rocker by the fire. The light from the flames caught the edges of his face, making him look both older and younger at the same time. Clay noticed the way his hands rested on his knees, steady, but with a faint tremor that wasn't from the cold alone hours passed that way. Clay went outside to split wood, check the cattle, and sweep snow off the porch. Each time he came back in, Eli was still there, staring into the fire like it was telling him a story he couldn't interrupt. Finally, late in the afternoon, Eli stood and set his hat back on his head. "Appreciate the coffee," he said. "And the meal. I'll be on my way." Clay frowned. "You sure? Storm's blowing in. Roads be worse tomorrow." Eli gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "I won't trouble you longer." And that was that. Clay watched him step off the porch and walk down the road until the white haze swallowed him. The next morning, Clay woke to a sound that didn't belong to the wind. Hooves, not one or two dozens. A low thunder, steady and growing. He stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, and saw them crest the ridge. A line of riders, 40 deep, their breath clouding in the cold. Horses kicked up frost with each step. At their head was Eli, sitting tall in the saddle now, his thin coat replaced by a heavy duster. They came down slow, the kind of slow that wasn't caution, but respect. When they reached the gate, every rider dismounted. Without a word, each pulled something from their saddlebag: flowers, wild prairie blooms, some frozen stiff, others wrapped in cloth to keep the frost off one by one. They laid them along the fence, careful and deliberate. Eli stepped forward. "You didn't know who I was yesterday," he said. "Didn't matter to you. You just gave a man coffee in the cold." Clay didn't answer right away. He was still looking at the flowers, a bright, living stripe against the frostbit fence. "These are my people," Eli went on. "They don't forget kindness, even the smallest kind." And with that, the riders mounted up, turned, and disappeared back over the ridge, leaving only hoofprints in the snow and a gate heavy with blooms. Clay stood there for a long time, coffee cooling in his hand. He didn't know what Eli had done to earn 40 loyal riders, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. But something told him this wasn't the last he'd hear of it. Somewhere in town, someone had already seen the riders. And stories like this, out here, had a way of traveling faster than the wind. Clay didn't expect company that day, certainly not after 40 horsemen had just left his gate looking like a scene from an old dime novel. By the time the riders had vanished over the ridge, he figured that was the end of it. Strange morning, stranger man, and now he could get back to the business of fence mending and feeding stock. But small towns have a way of sniffing out a story before you even finish living it. Around mid-morning, his neighbor, Walt Crowder, rolled up in his old Ford truck. Walt had a way of showing up when he smelled either gossip or trouble, and Clay suspected he was here for both. "You're famous, Dawson," Walt said the moment he stepped down from the cab. "Saw 40 riders headed out this way from town. My missus says half of Main Street saw him riding back in, too. Folks are talking." Clay kept his eyes on the wood he was splitting. "You don't say." "Oh, I say," Walt grinned. One fella swore it looked like some kind of funeral procession. Another said it was an outlaw parade. And then all Mrs. Talbot. You know her. She's convinced you're part of some secret gang now. Clay let the axe fall. "I just gave a man some coffee, that's all." "That's so." Well, word in town is that man was Eli Cardale. Clay froze a moment before stacking the next log. And, Walt leaned in a little, lowering his voice like the frost might be. Listening. Depending on who you ask, Eli's either the most dangerous man this side of the divide, or the most loyal friend you could hope to have. Folks can't decide which story they like better. Clay didn't answer that afternoon. The story walked itself into the Cedar Bluff Gazette. Annie Porter, the paper's only full-time reporter, was on his porch by 2 o'clock sharp, notebook in hand. Annie was young, smart, and knew that in a town where the most exciting headlines usually came from church bake sales, 40 riders bringing flowers was gold. Mr. Dawson, she started, smiling like she already had her lead sentence written. I'd like to hear about what happened here yesterday. Clay shook his head. Nothing to tell. I heard 40 men rode up your road and left flowers on your gate. That's not nothing. Maybe not. But it's not a story I want to tell. Annie didn't press, but Clay knew she wasn't going to let it drop. She had the same persistence. As the wind, you could shut the door, but eventually it found its way in through the cracks. That night, after feeding the stock, Clay sat by the fire with his coffee, staring into the flames. He kept seeing Eli's pale green eyes across the table, hearing that quiet, steady voice. They don't forget kindness. Who were they, exactly? He'd asked himself that question a dozen times. The riders weren't just cowhands out for a jaunt. They moved like a unit, disciplined, not rowdy. The flowers had been too deliberate, too ceremonial. And Eli hadn't looked like a man who stumbled into trouble. He'd looked like a man who'd walked through it and come out the other side with people who'd follow him anywhere. 3 days later, Clay got his answer, or part of it. He was in town for feed when he overheard 2 men at the hardware store. Cardale's. Back, one of them said. Saw him down by the river crossing. Didn't recognize him at first without the coat full of bullet holes. The other laughed. Well, if he's back, someone's about to get rich or dead. Or both. Clay didn't linger to hear the rest. When he stepped out onto Main Street, Annie was there again. This time she didn't ask. She handed him a folded piece of paper. Thought, you might want to see this. She said. It was an old clipping from a Denver paper, yellowed at the edges. The headline read, Cardale Gang Hits Carson City Bank, Leader Spares Hostages. The grainy photograph showed a younger Eli, hat brim low, holding a rifle. The article said the gang had made off with $60,000 but left everyone alive. Witnesses claimed the leader had even untied a child before riding off. Clay folded the clipping and handed it back. I don't know anything about that. Maybe not, Annie said. But you ought to know people are going to keep asking. That night, back at the ranch, Clay heard hooves again. Just one this time. He stepped onto the porch, and there was Eli, sitting his horse in the moonlight. Evening, Clay said. Mind if I water my horse? Eli asked. Help yourself. Eli dismounted, led the horse to the trough, and stood, quiet while it drank. The moon caught the lines in his face, and Clay realized he looked older than he'd first seemed. They're saying things in town, Clay said finally. They always do, about Carson City. Eli didn't flinch. Yeah, that was me. Clay took a slow breath. You planning to bring trouble to my door? Eli looked up, and for a second, Clay saw something sharp behind those pale green eyes. Then it softened. No, Eli said. The trouble's already here. You just don't see it yet. The next morning, Clay found something tucked into the flowers still hanging on his gate, a folded scrap of paper, tied with a piece of twine. Inside, in careful handwriting, it read, They're coming. Don't trust the man in the blue coat. There was no signature. But Clay didn't need one to know who left it. By evening, he noticed a stranger on the far ridge, watching the ranch from horseback. Didn't move, didn't wave. Just sat there, still as stone. The wind carried the scent of snow. And Clay had the uneasy feeling that both the storm and the trouble Eli had warned about were getting closer. The stranger on the ridge didn't come down that day. He sat his horse until the sun slid behind the hills, then turned away without a word or a wave. Clay figured maybe he was just passing through. But when he saw the same man 2 mornings later, same horse, same stillness, same blue coat catching, the early light, the unease settled deeper in his gut. The coat was a striking thing, not the work-worn canvas you'd see on ranch hands. No, this was tailored, wool, dyed that rich, deep shade only money could buy. The kind of coat that didn't belong this far from town unless its owner meant business. And out here, business could mean anything from land deals to blood feuds. Clay didn't see Eli for almost a week after that night at the trough. He told himself it didn't matter. He'd just given a man breakfast, nothing more. But the folded note, still tucked into his shirt pocket, was a constant weight. Their cunning. Don't trust the man in the blue coat. On the 7th day, Eli returned. No entourage this time, just him, the duster back on his shoulders, dust in the creases of his boots. "Need a favor," he said, before Clay could even offer coffee. "That's so?" Clay asked. Eli nodded toward the barn. "Somewhere we can talk." Inside, the air smelled of hay and oil. Eli closed the door behind them. "The man in the blue coat is named Grant Rourke," Eli began. "Used to run a mining company out west. Got rich quick, then mean quicker. When he couldn't buy land, he took it. When folks resisted, they disappeared." Clay listened, leaning against a stall. I crossed him once, Eli went on. "Years back. Took a payroll wagon he'd stolen from his own workers, gave it back to him. Been on his list ever since." Clay frowned. "So why is he watching me?" Eli hesitated. "Because I came here, and because you helped me. He thinks that makes us connected." Clay rubbed a hand over his jaw. "I'm not connected to you." "You are now," Eli said simply. That night, Clay didn't sleep much. Every creak of the cabin seemed louder. Every gust of wind seemed to carry hoofbeats that weren't there. By morning, his decision was made that if trouble was coming, he wasn't going to be caught flat-footed. He checked the locks, sharpened the old Winchester's edge with a cloth, and laid in enough firewood to last through a week of bad weather. But trouble didn't come in a week, or the next. Instead, it came on the 13th day, riding in with a dust cloud and the blue coat at its center. Clay was in the pasture when he saw them. 6 riders, all armed, all hard-eyed. Rourke rode front, sitting tall and easy like a man who'd never had to earn his confidence. His horse was glossy, well-fed, its tack polished. They reined up at the gate. Rourke smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't warm the eyes. "Mr. Dawson," he called. "Mind if we talk?" Clay walked up slow. "Depends on the talk." Rourke rested an elbow on his saddle horn. "A man named Eli Cardell came through here. I'm looking for him." "Lots of folks come through," Clay said. "This one owes me," Rourke replied, still smiling. "And I'm the kind of man who collects." Clay kept his face still. "Can't help you." Rourke studied him a long moment. "I think you can, and I think you will." Or his gaze drifted toward the house. Things could get uncomfortable here. That smile again. The riders left without forcing the issue, but their message was clear. They'd be back. Clay didn't have to wait long to tell Eli. That evening, as if he'd been watching from some hidden place, Eli appeared at the edge of the yard. "They've come." Then Eli said, "They'll be back." Clay answered, "What's your plan?" Eli looked toward the horizon. "My people will come. We'll be ready." The people came at dawn 2 days later. Not just the 40 riders from before, more. 50, maybe 60. The sound of their approach filled the valley, low and steady, like a drum you felt in your chest. They set up camp on the far side of the pasture, their horses tied in neat rows, fires lit against the cold. Some carried rifles, some carried nothing more than bedrolls and the weight of loyalty in their eyes. Clay walked among them once, nodding when they nodded, saying little. He didn't need to be told that every one of them was here for Eli. And, by extension, for him now. Rourke came back that afternoon. He brought twice as many men this time. The meeting happened at the gate. Eli stood at Clay's side, his duster hanging loose, hands empty. "Cardale," Rourke said, his voice carrying over the cold air. "Thought you might be hiding out here." "Not hiding," Eli said. "Just visiting a friend." "You and—" "I aren't finished," Rourke said. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long. Give me what's mine, and maybe I let you walk away. What's yours?" Eli asked. "You know damn well." Eli shook his head. "The only thing I took from you was what you'd already stolen." The men shifted in their saddles. Rourke's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll take something from you." "Something you'll miss." His gaze flicked toward Clay again. That was the moment Clay realized this wasn't about the money, or even about Eli. It was about breaking loyalty, about showing everyone that following Eli came with a cost, and maybe that was why Eli had come here in the first place. Not just for coffee, but because he'd needed someone who didn't owe him anything to stand beside him when Rourke came. The standoff didn't end in gunfire. It ended in silence, because as Rourke's men shifted forward, Eli's riders began to appear, not charging, not shouting, just riding in from every direction, slow and deliberate. They filled the space between the house and the horizon, there. Sheer number making words unnecessary. Rourke's eyes flicked over them. He could count as well as anyone. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Maybe it is," Eli replied. Rourke's smile was gone now. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following in a cloud of dust. The riders stayed one more night. In the morning, they left the way they'd come, silent except for the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves. Every single one of them laid a flower on the gate before they went. Eli was the last. He set down a single white bloom, the frost already catching on its petals. Asterisk. "You didn't have to stand with me," he said. "Maybe not," Clay replied. "But coffee's not worth much if you only pour it for people who can pay you back." Eli smiled then, the first real smile Clay had seen from him. "If you ever need me, you know how to find me." And then he was gone. Weeks passed. The snow came, then melted, then came again. The flowers on the gate withered, but Clay didn't take them down. Folks in town kept asking about the morning the riders came, and he kept giving the same answer. "I just gave a man coffee in the cold." But when the wind blew right, carrying the faint sound of hoofbeats from somewhere far off, Clay would find himself on the porch, coffee in hand, looking to the ridge. Because out here, in this forgotten frontier, the past had a way of riding back to you, sometimes on 40 horses, sometimes on one.